It's a cool May day here in New England. One of those days where you feel like wearing a winter hat. Here I am in the car as we continue our informal pop-up course on Mitch Horowitz's fantastic book, One Simple Idea. And specifically, we're really focusing on the final chapter in the book called Does It Work? As always, what we're talking about is filled with uncommon common sense, in my opinion. If you're looking for help, if you would like coaching, or even a free consultation with yours truly, you can reach me at info@radicalcounselor.com. I've also written several books about this topic that try to share this uncommon common sense that we're going to be exploring yet again today. Mitch, at the end of Does It Work, this chapter, says there's, generally speaking, the 4 schools that he likes to divide up the positive thinking movement into. And I thought it would be worthwhile for us to go over each school that Mitch talks about. This first school we're going to go over is, without question, the most popular one. When people think of law of attraction ideas, manifesting ideas, this is usually what they're talking about. Without further ado, I'm just going to read from what Mitch says here. He calls this first school the magical thinking or divine thought school. Mitch writes, "This is the most widespread form of the mind power philosophy, encompassing the outlook of figures such as Norman Vincent Peale, Joseph Murphy, Ernest Holmes, and Wallace D. Wattles, as well as Neville Goddard. It informs the outlook of the secrets around the burn. The magical thinking perspective sees the individual as a kind of holy channel for a higher power. It could also be called the law of attraction school. It is the least, quote-unquote, provable approach, yet the most popular and enduring. Each of the aforementioned thinkers professed a different version of the philosophy. Peale was a conservative Christian who used scripture to support his ideas about prayer power. Murphy was a New Age mystic who told of an all-powerful subconscious mind that represented an inner God, similar to Neville. Wattles, Holmes, and Byrne adhered to an occult science that considers man a transmitter of an infinite power, or of thinking stuff, as Wattles put it. Each denizen of this approach, whatever his or her individual wrinkle, sees the mind as a vessel and ignition engine constantly outpicturing all of our thoughts into reality. Seen from their perspective, the mind, with proper awareness, can function as a tool to dispatch every right desire. This school's ethical framework is poorly developed. Though Peale and Holmes did hew to scriptural ethics, and other practitioners spoke of karmic reciprocity. I always have trouble saying that word. Ultimately, this approach amounts to an intensely personal theology. As rationalist philosopher David Hume wrote of Christianity, mere reason is insufficient to convince us of its veracity. That said, the power of such faith in the life of an individual should not be discounted. Every religion has its allegories, whether it's Moses parting the Red Sea or Muhammad ascending to heaven on a winged horse. Some believers see such things as literally true, but for many they are symbolic. The notion of an attitude as a literal force may be seen as the central allegory of the New Age. No scientist can prove that our thoughts create our reality, life coach Anthony Robbins writes, but it's a useful lie. It's an empowering belief. That's why I choose to believe in it. I believe that no act of self-deception can be useful. That's Mitch writing that. But Robbins does get at a certain point. The faith in the force of one's mind, whether definitely provable, can serve as a mechanism for a greater and deeply affecting psychological truth. This will be explored directly below in the next school that he's going to talk about. So again, that's a hell of an excerpt, a lot there. Yeah, you might want to listen to it again, or as I said, just read the book, or listen to the audiobook version of this book. There's a lot there, and what Mitch just described is what most people think of when it comes to the law of attraction. And, on this channel, we try to be more holistic and encompassing with different ways of looking at this stuff, But generally speaking, the mind power movement, as people see it in popular spaces when they talk about it on YouTube or Reddit or any other social media platform, this is it. And it's not provable scientifically, up to this point, at least from what we know, even though you hear all the time, oh, it's a law, it's provable, and people spouting stuff about quantum physics that when you actually look into it, it's like, that's not quantum physics. But nonetheless, you're on this channel, you're listening to me. This stuff's hugely effective, as Mitch pointed out, for a lot of people, including myself, However, Mitch makes the really good point that the school's ethical framework is poorly developed. And that's what we've been going over in this series, in this pop-up course. So there's a lot of pros and there's also cons that we should look at soberly. And the sober, looking at is not done enough, in my opinion. But the majority of stuff that we hear about when it comes to manifesting comes from this first school. All right, we have time. Let's read what Mitch says the second school is. The second school is something that I very much relate to. You're going to see why in a second. Mitch calls the second school the conditioning or reprogramming school. This school represents the reconditioning approach of figures such as the Reverend Leslie Weatherhead, French psychologist Emile Coué, and an American cosmetic surgeon and motivational writer named Maxwell Maltz. It is worth noting the case of Maltz, whose 1960 book Psycho-Cybernetics was a motivational landmark. I'll put a link above to our playlist of Maltz videos. As a reconstructive surgeon, Maltz discovered that many of his patients, from burn victims to people with deformities to non-imperative individuals desirous of change in appearance, did in fact experience improved self-esteem following surgery. But he also noticed that some manifestly did not. He questioned why. Maltz came to believe that man is a creature of conditioning. Maltz saw the mind as a homing device that seeks out and works to manifest the subconscious images that we constantly and unknowingly send it. The pictures of the mind cannot remake reality, he wrote, but they can lead to and shape outcomes in remarkable ways. Recondition the mind, Maltz reasoned, and you can objectively alter your life. Maltz's philosophy is a good overall summary of this school, which sees the mind as a complex conditioned machine capable of reprogramming. In this view, conditioning is destiny. The conditioning school prescribes affirmations, visualizations, behavior modeling, and guided meditations to reprogram our self-image and thus improve our functioning. Many inquirers who attempt this approach are surprised by the rigor demanded from such programs. At least an hour a day of visualizations and guided meditations can be required in Maltz's program, for example. Quick aside, that's not necessary, but Maltz did recommend something like that a lot of the time. Mitch continues, significantly, the conditioning school sought to jettison the religio-mystical qualities in the magical thinking school and reconfigure New Thought as a secular, success-based psychology that can be used for business, relationships, athletics, and general happiness. In so doing, it popularized the field of business motivation and laid some of the groundwork for the general field of positive psychology. This approach also foresaw recent advances in neuroscience, in particular the concept that the electroneural responses of the brain are self-reprogrammable in a process that has been called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is examined later in this chapter as well. The conditioning school has a weakness similar to that of the magical thought school. It offers little in the way of ethical development. The aims of reconditioning are often careerist or success-based, but as a motivational psychology, it has undeniable validity. So fantastic. This is why, I often say for people who get into this law of attraction stuff, the majority of people, I would say, especially on places like YouTube, get into this law of attraction stuff from the first school angle, right? The magical thinking or divine school angle. And it's very spiritual sounding. I personally relate to a lot of that spiritually sounding stuff, as do I know a lot of people. However, it's very important, and why I always talk about it, to understand that you can look at most of these positive thinking ideas, these ideas about changing yourself from the inside out, from a purely psychological perspective. And that's what this second school that Mitch talks about, the conditioning or reprogramming school, he calls it, allows us to do. If you don't want to be spiritual or religious about this, quite frankly, you can just apply the advice of Emile Coué and Maxwell Maltz. Leslie Weatherhead is someone that I haven't read that much, but he's similar to Coué and Maltz in his general, outlook about reprogramming the mind, the subconscious. Coué, in my opinion, and most people know this who watch this channel at all, Coué explains these general manifesting positive thinking principles better, in my eyes, than anybody of the last 100 or so years. And Coué and Maltz really give you a solid psychological foundation in which to experiment and apply these tools in your life. If you don't want to be overly spiritual or overly into magical thinking, this second school is a great way to go. A great way to go. And obviously, you, as I do and as I talk about on this channel, you can combine these schools in whichever way you want. Personally, I'm using a lot of both of these first two schools we're reading about. I'm thinking about it a lot of the time from a psychological perspective and how I think the subconscious works and how goal setting works and how the mind works, how the imagination works in terms of getting us to our goal, which both Coué and Maltz talk about so brilliantly without spiritual language. And I'm also personally applying a lot of spiritual ideas that the first school and people like Neville and Joseph Murphy and H. Emily Cady and Joel Goldsmith are talking about. All right. It is also worth mentioning, as Mitch said here, that when you take Coué's ideas or Maltz's ideas, and Maltz's ideas, as Mitch said, became very popular. But if you do not come at them from this kind of like very holistic, you could almost say spiritual angle, they can very easily become perverted, become too business oriented, become too self-improvement oriented, where it's about almost cultivating selfish tendencies inadvertently. And that's why, like business seminars, and for instance, they use psychocybernetics sometime. And like, it's missing the deeper point of what Maltz is implying. Because while Maltz and Coué and Weatherhead, or I shouldn't, I'm not sure about Weatherhead, but I assume Weatherhead was a reverend. He was religious. While Coué and Maltz were using psychological secular terminology usually, they were both deeply spiritual, ethical people. That's very, very clear when you're looking at their teachings, right? And if you don't have that kind of, ethical, starting point, which both Coué and Maltz did, you can easily misuse the information that they share or use it in a way that's just not very interesting. Something of a side note here that's interesting is I think Maltz's work was like bought out by Dan Kennedy and some other people. Dan Kennedy's a very famous copywriter and advertising guy. And they kind of like remarketed psychocybernetics. And you read that stuff, and there's some very interesting things in there, but it's like soulless. It's spiritual-less. It's just like marketing, advertising, reprogramming your mind type stuff. While Matt Fury, the guy who Dan Kennedy then sold the rights to Maltz's stuff to Matt Fury comes at it, who also was a business guy, Matt Fury is, but he comes at it from a much more spiritual background, and he shares Maltz's wisdom in a much more interesting way than people like Dan Kennedy did. I don't think that's coincidental, right? With Maltz's stuff, psychocybernetics, it's so practical. It's easy to use it for things like improving, your business, right, or your self-image in whatever way you want. But we still probably want to really seep ourselves in the ethical, spiritual depth that it offers as well, even though it's not explicitly stated in the work of Maltz. Anyway, that was a side that I thought was worth sharing. There's two other schools that that Mitch is going to explore here. They are not, when we think of like law of attraction, manifesting, we usually don't think about these schools as much. I'm going to go over them next video because they are worth, exploring. And then we'll be concluding this course shortly. So again, if you have any questions or if you'd like coaching, I can be reached at info@radicalcounselor.com. I hope you're enjoying this course. Until next time, be well.